Hello, my name is Matthew Bellisario. Welcome to the BellisarioSonic YouTube channel. We have with us today another wonderful guest here, London Board Award-winning jazz saxophonist and composer, described by The Guardian as a virtuoso saxophonist. He tours and records with today's top jazz musicians in various combinations, which we'll talk about here. His Live in London here sitting next to me, this wonderful album was Jazzwise Editor's Album of the Year in 2023 and was featured in All About Jazz's 2023 must-haves. Welcome, Alex Hitchcock.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That's a lovely introduction. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I really appreciate you coming on the channel to talk about jazz, talk about your records here. I was looking up and just learning a little bit about your background. There's not a whole lot about, your upbringing and how you got into jazz. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just grew up just with my mum, and she, would swear that she can play anything on the recorder by ear as a child, but it wasn't beyond that, like a particularly musical household. I played the violin first. I wasn't very good at it, to be honest. I enjoyed it, but I think you'll know, imagine your viewers will know, like when you can tell that you just don't really have an aptitude for something. So when I did then try out the sax age about 10, I got to try it out for the first time, and I kind of took to it a bit quicker. It kind of self-perpetuated, because when you're better at something, it makes you want to practice. And I'd been a singer as a kid, so I think there was something in that. Like I always gravitate to the higher reaches of the tenor or can do. So I think there's something about that made that sort of singing quality to the sax really appeal. And I was really lucky with my first teacher was a sax player from the UK, a great sax player called Katie Brown, and she had me on quite a strict diet of Cannonball Adderley transcriptions and Phil Woods and Charlie Parker, obviously, because I started on alto. So that was my way in. And I remember my mum bought me a Coleman Hawkins CD and a Joshua Redman CD. So they were my first two exposures to the tenor.
And that kind of got you started and on the jazz journey there?
Yeah, kind of. I actually, I don't know, lie is a strong word, but I kind of, when Katie first asked me if I could read chord symbols, I sort of nodded along. So I spent a good few months kind of playing everything by ear because I couldn't read them. So I had quite a lot of ear training early on, and then had to sort of get used to reading changes and stuff like that. But it was quite a bebop focused start, which I really appreciated, because if you're talking about in terms of grounding yourself in the tradition, there's a lot of ways that you could do that. But I think for a saxophone player, it's quite important to go to the source. Lots of different ways to do it, but for me, it was important to go to the source in that respect.
And did you have any formal schooling as far as learning music?
Yeah, I did a postgrad at the Royal Academy of Music in London. So I studied there for 2 years.
And how was that? How did that affect you musically?
It was brilliant. Yeah, the way that course is run, they really give you quite a lot of freedom to develop your own thing compositionally. Like, it's really encouraged. So Nick Smart, who runs that course, and Pete Churchill, who I don't know exactly what his title is, but he's absolutely integral to that course. They both were quite close and worked with Kenny Wheeler, so there's quite a big influence of his music on the course, which gives you quite a solid harmonic kind of grounding, I would say. But then beyond that, you're really encouraged to develop your own thing, which I think is important, because a lot of people, myself included, can kind of come out of college, haven't got your chops together, and think, okay, where are the gigs? But you don't necessarily realise that the gigs will come when you have something maybe a little bit more specific to say, or a little bit more specific to your sound.
So it's always interesting talking to different musicians about the formal schooling, and then what you learn on the bandstand or learn at jazz jam sessions or learning from other musicians. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a really interesting question, because I think, you know, in the last few decades there's maybe fewer opportunities to get to play on the roads with mentor figures. I think you have to really seek those opportunities out for yourself, and you're very lucky if you get them. So I think playing with, I've had 2 years playing in the great Kirk Lightsey's current quartet, when it plays in the UK anyway, and in France, and we played in Germany and Switzerland. So I obviously learned a lot through that, just in terms of, Kirk will have heard a lot of young saxophone players like me, and I think I learned that he doesn't want me to try and do some sort of facsimile of what I've heard on records, you know, the people that I've heard him play with. He's more interested in you playing for you, and that's quite exposing. It can kind of be scary. So that was that was quite a steep learning curve for me, but one I got a lot out of. Then another person I'd think of is the brilliant bass player Jasper Højby, who's Danish but lives in London, and I guess he's possibly best known for his work with the trio Phronesis. But playing some of his music and kind of just getting more to grips with playing with him opened up a big rhythmic dimension for me that I'm kind of still working pretty hard on. So those are sort of elders that come to mind. And then in terms of peers, there's loads. There's a sax player called Tom Barford who's on that Folk Devils album. We co-lead that band, who I think is just an amazing instrumentalist. So I've learned a lot from just playing saxophone alongside him. So there's kind of different ways that you learn, I guess. You learn from the elders in different ways. You learn from your peers in different ways. Spending time here in New York, I've got much more into listening, at least, to music that's on the freer side, or on the more purely improvised side. There's a pianist here called Eliana Fishbein, who is an electronic composer and pianist, and we've been playing free together and planning on recording together, and that's just kind of changed a lot of my perception on the way music works and is delivered and is played in community with other people. So I guess that's kind of like that's 4 different examples, I guess, of being developed in quite different ways depending on who you're working with, you know.
Yeah, so you're in New York now. I'm always curious the difference between the jazz scene in New York versus what it's like over in London or over in Europe. And you seem to be in both of those scenes. Can you talk a little bit about that, the differences and perhaps the similarities?
Yeah, of course I can. Sorry, I'm smiling because I've just poured coffee down my arm, but you actually can't see that, so that's all good. I'll deal with it while I'm talking. Yeah, it's very hard to really categorize them into the main differences between the scenes, you know, and it's also quite hard to get perspective because I'm from London, so the London jazz scene has always just been to me what I've known. And when I was out of London doing my undergraduate degree in a different subject, so when I came back to London to study at the academy and try and gig there, it did kind of feel culturally it didn't feel like moving to a new place at all, but in terms of getting into the scene it felt like moving to a new place, and it took me a while. But at the same time, that's the only environment I've ever really been in, so it's quite difficult to speak about that with perspective. But what I would say is there is a real breadth of musicians there that doesn't always get highlighted or focused on, but I think it's quite an inspiring scene in the sense that people are, you know, it's probably a smaller scene than New York, but there's people working on a real variety of different things, and obviously the sort of sound that's kind of goes together more with Afrobeat that's coming out of southeast London has done a lot, I think, for the profile of the scene as a whole, and that's kind of really nice to see because I think that was probably overdue, and certainly overdue musicians working in that scene getting their recognition and then kind of taking that around the world, like Shabaka Hutchings, I guess, Nabaya Garcia and Ezra Collective and people like that. Although I don't know if they're all from South London. Shabaka might be from North, but you take my point. It's kind of getting exported around the world now, which is impressive. And then in New York, I know everybody says this, but I've just been really struck by the intensity here from the downbeat of any session or any gig or a lot of interactions, actually. I think people are totally unafraid here to be extremely serious and about their thing and motivated by their thing, in a way that maybe doesn't come so naturally to Brits, because we tend to sort of self-deprecate a little bit and what's the phrase? People hide their light behind a bushel, you know. People are really great, but they're not so on the front foot with that. Whereas here, I think there's no shame in pushing for something that might be beyond you, or trying to take other people along with you in the way that you frame that. So I've learned a lot from that and the intensity of it. And obviously, it's a very varied scene here as well. I've been living in I'm up in Washington Heights at the moment, but I've been living in Brooklyn for most of it, and some of the more through composed music that's coming out of Brooklyn at the moment I think is incredible. I don't know if you've come across that album by Philip Golub. It was released last year. It's called Abiding Memory, and it's had some really, really good press. It was in the New York Times and stuff like that, but I went and saw them play that music live last night, and it's just being played at such a high technical level, and it feels like you're pretty much consistently surrounded by that in New York.
It's interesting because when I listen to a lot of the musicians from the UK or from Europe in general, it seems to me that it's a little bit, I think, a little more freer in some ways than I would hear from the States, even though there's definitely a lot of venturing out into kind of the hip-hop, jazz, electronic stuff. But I find a little bit more avant-garde type of things going on. But also, I definitely want to talk about this record here because this is fantastic. You hear a variety of things going on this. So you tell us a little bit about how you put this together. You've got 3 different lineups here from 3 different evenings, and it sounds like you've kind of written these compositions for the different people that are playing, right, with you here. But talk about the way that you're able to, because I can hear bebop influences on this, but yet I kind of hear some really improvisation that kind of goes out, you know, if you will. So talk to us a little bit about this fusion of these different styles, if you will.
Yeah, of course. It's a really good question, and it's a hard question to answer in the specific. And also, I should just say thank you so much for taking the time to introduce this album to your listeners and to really giving it some airtime on your program. So I really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's fantastic.
Going into the detail. I guess in a sort of nutshell, the history of it was, I don't think of it as a pandemic project at all, but the original idea did come in 2020 when I was kind of thinking, well, in 2021 particularly, when things did start to open up a little bit, I was like, well, people's diaries are pretty clear at the moment. This would be a really good opportunity to do something a little bit more large scale. So the first recording in this series I also did with 3 bands, and it was also over 3 days, but it was in a studio in London, and it was 3, I think it went from trio up to sextet, but it was basically 3 core lineups, one on each day. And yeah, logistically, and I think it's kind of nice to think a bit logistically in the way that you put your projects together, because then they're reflective of the sort of conditions in which they were made. But logistically, I knew I would be able to get people together, and there's a certain amount of wanting to document or archive the part of the scene that I see, and the breadth of it, and the musicians that I get to play with a lot, and that kind of inspire me and make the writing really easy, because as you say, you're kind of writing with someone's very specific sound in mind. So this current triple album was just a progression of that, really. I was thinking, well, where would you take it next? And it kind of seems to make sense, as things were opening up as well, to take it out of the studio, to take it into that live context, but still to have the thing of the 3 bands. Part of the reason for having 3 as well, if you're going to call an album Dream Band, like that kind of can sound a little bit sweet, a little bit nostalgic maybe, and I kind of wanted to suggest that there isn't one definitive lineup. You could keep doing this, you could keep putting different combinations of musicians together and and it would work because of the strength of the scene. But yeah, I wanted to do it live. The Vortex was a very natural place to do it because it's such a supportive club of the scene. It's run by musicians, and it's kind of in quite at the heart of one part of the scene's community, really. And it was very easy, as I say, to do the writing. I did most of the writing in 2021, and we recorded in 2022. But if you think about, there's 3 trumpet players on the record. There's James Kopus, Alexandra Ridout, and Mark Kavuma. And they're so different. They have different voices. Even the way they phrase a melody, I'm sure you will have heard, is so different. So it was less about imposing exactly what I wanted musically on them, but more thinking, what would I like to hear them on? What would I like to get to play with them? And then writing for that.
Well, you've got a lot of different musicians on here, like you were just talking about. You've got a couple of different guitar players on here, Ant Law, Rob Luft, and different bass players. So how do you go? How long have you been playing with these different musicians?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, someone like James Kopus or Mark Michel have been playing with for about 7-8 years, something like that. And then some of them were much newer to me. I'd known Liselotte Osblom, the vocalist, on the first night of recording for a while, but we had never really played together. Same with Rio Kai, the bass player. I'd known of him, but we hadn't really played together. So for some of them, it was an opportunity to start working together and get to make something together. And then for some of them, it was an opportunity to deepen that existing relationship that I already had with some of them.
And how did you decide who to pair with who? So how did you decide that Kit Downs would go well with, the bass player Connor Chaplin, or how did you choose that? Was that just kind of how did you plan that out?
I kind of, not to draw a completely crude analogy, but when you're, I think football managers talk about the I can't believe I'm making this analogy, and I'm talking about soccer as well. They'll talk about the cohesiveness of the team as a whole, but what's also important is this sort of relationships in between the individuals in the team. If you have a centre-back pairing that's played together in the trenches in Millwall, then they're going to be more solid when you go up to the Premier League, etc., etc. Someone like and I don't mean to detract from anyone's musicality as well, because all of these people could have made music with everybody else, but I've known Mark Michel for a long time. Kit Downs and Lewis Wright grew up together in Norfolk, so have been playing together for probably about, I don't know, but I'm guessing about 15, 20 years, something like that. Jamie Murray, the drummer, and Rio Kai, the bass player, who were both on the first night, they have a long-running residency together in East London. So I was kind of looking to sort of juxtapose, I guess, that kind of thing where you had people that knew each other really well, whereas with people that hadn't played together before, but I thought there would be some sort of affinity there in the way they make music and the way that they would work together. So I did think really carefully about how to mix and match the musicians, and I think I'm quite happy with how that came out in the record, because I think the sound worlds are consistent, because I guess it's my writing, so there would be a thread. That's the thread unifying them, but I still think there's quite a lot of variety between the way the bands played the music on each night, which I found super satisfying.
Well, this is definitely a great listen all the way through. You've got 3 LPs. So first of all, how did you decide to put this on record? Because this obviously is probably, fairly expensive to produce. This is a beautiful package. You've got great pictures here, 3 LPs. And how did you decide how to order the tracks? Because I noticed you'll have a track, from one lineup, then you'll have a track from another lineup, and so forth.
So on the packaging and just generally getting the project out to the world question, I should definitely shout out Michael Janisch, who is a great bass player and also runs the Whirlwind Recordings label that I released this on. He was sort of consistently excited about the idea of putting this music out from the start, and he was supportive in many ways, including financially, when we decided to put this out as a triple LP. It's obviously not something that I could have really got off the ground on my own in terms of printing triple vinyl. So I really should register that that was great from their perspective, and it wouldn't have happened had he not been involved. And then on the question of sequencing, oh yeah, and also just to say with the triple, I guess I was very much thinking we would have a one album and I would just pick and choose the best tracks from the 3 nights, but I thought there was enough music that sounded really good that stood up to releasing a lot more of it, and that was partly because of the audience vibe on the gigs as well. The audience vibe was really, really good, so I think we captured a lot of good stuff. We captured a lot of good atmosphere in the club, so why not release more, rather than hold it back, and drip feed it. And then in terms of the sequencing, I knew that I didn't just want to release one night per vinyl, because I thought that seemed perhaps a less imaginative way of doing it. And then I kind of ordered it as you would a normal, in quotes, album. Sometimes it would be a rhythmic thing, sometimes it would be a harmonic thing, which tracks run into each other. I'd never produced vinyl before, so it was quite nice being restricted by it, where you can't have certain tracks together on one side because they'll overrun. So it was I remember having lots of different running order versions, and then at some point just had to sort of tear off the band-aid and pick one. But it's something that kind of seems to have resonated with people when they've spoken to me about listening to the record, that you hear one band and then you hear another, and it's different, but it kind of feels the same.
Yeah, when I first got the record, I started listening to it, and I was starting to read through there, and I was like, oh, this is a different lineup. And I was looking, I was like, oh, okay, because there's different ways you could have done this. Like you're talking about, you could have put one band on one vinyl. You could have had each, 3 nights of the 3, pretty much almost 3 concerts, all separate. But I do like the way it's creatively flows together. Some people might want to say, oh, well, maybe we want to hear it like it happened in the club, right? So you have some of those people that, I want to hear the concert as it happened type thing. But I really like the way this flows together. And I think a lot of times in these days, it's nice to see some creativity when it comes to putting something like this together, because it would have been really easy to just do three nights, right?
And I think I would say to the people who would say, oh, I want to hear the concert as it happened, which is totally something I would say as well. I would then say, well, unfortunately, you had to be there, because right. I think conceptually something does change when you document a live recording and then you release it as, your physical object or your streaming object or whatever. It's not the same. It's not the same as being in the club. We have to accept that we're manipulating it in some way by setting it up as a recording in the first place. So you, even if you released them one night per vinyl, you still wouldn't experience it as you would have experienced it in the club. So why not see how we can make it a better whole, I guess, by like reordering and
sure.
changing the format a bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't, even when you go back to those old live jazz records, a lot of those were edited. They did a lot of different things that people didn't realize they were doing, that they thought they were getting the real experience, and you're like you say, you never really get the real experience as being there.
Totally.
What about recording? Talk to us a little bit about the difference in recording something like this live, because obviously you have to be thinking. I mean, I guess you could do some editing on this. I don't know if you did or not, as far as. But is that in your mind that, the mistakes are going to be there versus going into a studio? What is your mindset there?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the editing that happened on it was more chopping off endings or beginnings, and just kind of, because we would segue some things in the club, so the editing would be kind of ordering it into tracks and things like that. But in terms of fine-tuning editing, what you hear is pretty much the sound that was made in the room, which is not something I'm particularly precious about, but also there just wasn't that much that needed to be edited, I guess. As a band leader, I suppose you do the things that you can to ensure that the musicians playing your music are going to feel comfortable on the gig. So the sending the charts out a couple of weeks in advance was less because I didn't want people to make so-called mistakes, but more because I wanted people to have had sight of them so that they could actually enjoy the playing on the gig and get away from the charts a little bit. The idea of mistakes as such kind of doesn't necessarily bother me so much. And then what I thought was kind of important was each day we arrived at the club at about 3 or something, or 2 in the afternoon, and we played the set through once, like maybe twice maximum for a couple of the tunes. So people had rehearsed, but I also wanted it to be kind of fresh. It was, you know, maybe the 4th, 5th or 6th time that people had seen the music, so that there was a degree of there was a degree of like having to read the chart there, but I also thought people were pretty free in the way that they did it. I guess I've been thinking quite a lot about that recently in terms of band leading, and how through your band leading you communicate, or you try to communicate to people that there are certain things that you don't mind about, not because you're slapdash, but because you just want them to have the space to go for something, and if it doesn't work, that's absolutely fine. So the kind of atmosphere in the rehearsals and on the gigs was, I thought, pretty constructive. People were focused, but they weren't afraid to try things. The other thing I would say, of course, is we played 2 sets each night, so we did get 2 takes of each tune. I should admit to that.
Well, that way you can pick. But that's still a pretty amazing, you know, it amazes me that you guys are able to play these tunes, because there's a lot of different rhythmic changes and stops and different things going on. And it always amazes me just how you guys as musicians are able to do this, and it sounds amazing. So
thank you. I guess I can't really take much credit for that, but I appreciate it on their behalf.
What about studio recording? How do you view that? Is that completely different? Is that a lot more preparation? Talk to us about the Folk Devils album, which I actually have ordered. I still haven't got it yet, so I'll be doing a review on that here soon. But
I'm really pleased to hear that, and I'm sorry that you haven't got it, and we can talk outside this show, but I'm happy to chase that up for you if it doesn't arrive.
Well, that's
soon.
okay. It should be coming soon, but yeah.
Nice.
But talk to us about like the difference there as far as how that was done. That's how you did that record.
That was a lot more. The music was written to be kind of performed in the studio, and then we'd think about taking it out live later. We had already released one record with that lineup. Tom and I had in 2020 on Edition Records, and that was with the really great Ferg Island on bass and James Madron on drums, who you might have come across on other recordings. And we kind of had this idea that we would do a series of albums with that band, and we would do it with a different rhythm section every time. So Tom and me would be the point of consistency, and then we'd sort of see how it sounded with other people. Jasper Hoiby, who was on bass for the Folk Devils record, and Mark Michelle both played together in Jasper's trio project Planet B. So that was, I guess, an example of a pre-existing relationship that we sort of that we liked, and that we wanted to lean on and see, you know, what they were going to play in that context. And that was, it's quite complicated music, like I guess it would be at first glance kind of perceived maybe as difficult on the page. So we did rehearse it, and we then gigged it once in Manchester, which was really fun, but it kind of had the vibe of an open rehearsal, the gig. Like there was things flying all over the place. And then we went into this really lovely residential studio in Wales, in quite remote, called Giant Wafer, where the vibe is always really good because you sleep on site, so you cook for each other and you hang in the evenings after you've recorded. You can record at any time of day or night, really. So that was a really fantastic way of doing it. And that one, you know, we did some editing, we did quite a few takes of certain tunes. We had to work quite hard on it just because the music is quite, in some senses, quite difficult.
And so how is that in the studio? Is that 1 or 2 takes and that's it? Or are you trying to keep that fresh as well, or is that a little more difficult?
You know, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if you could get everything on the first take? But I think we might have been up to 4, 5, 6 on some of those tunes, and then, you know, again, not being squeamish about taking some comps.
And so that I would expect, you know, different people approach it different ways. Some people want to try to keep it spontaneous, but then again, there's a certain aspect of making a record. I want to make sure that this is right. I want to make sure it's the tunes the way I want it. And so how do you balance that as far as like deciding, how many we're going to do of these, how much are we going to edit, that kind of thing?
It's a good question, and I think it's a consideration when you're writing as well. Like, do I want to write something that's so difficult that it's going to take us a few tries to capture this in one go, or would I rather write something that is kind of a platform where we can feel pretty much instantly comfortable and then go? But I suppose there's improvisation in every track, so. And we hadn't been playing the tunes for a long time, so that is part of what kept it fresh, I think, in the studio. And it's kind of intellectually in a way a challenge to just play the music as it is on the page, but make it sound good and make it feel good. And I wouldn't want that to be the only way that I worked, but it's quite interesting to sort of try and operate across both, and do something where the attention to detail in terms of accuracy is really important, and then sometimes that accuracy of translating what's on the page is less important compared to the general vibe, the atmosphere that you're creating.
So each project, then you approach it in a different way.
Yeah, and I would do that, mainly as a way of challenging myself. I'm planning some recordings in New York that will be pretty much totally free. Like there will be some concept behind them, but there won't be any written music, which is which is new for me to do. And again, just trying to exist across those different contexts and be convincing.
What are your thoughts on? When I talk to these different musicians, they talk about over intellectualizing things, that perhaps a lot of people are trying to do too many complicated things, and you lose some musicality. How do you balance that when you're writing your tunes? How do you say, okay, I want to have these cool rhythm changes or these verses, and making sure it still remains musically engaging for somebody rather than just a pure intellectual thing?
Yeah, I suppose you wouldn't want to. Well, maybe you would, but I wouldn't necessarily want to do something that I felt that I was making just purely for myself, in terms of not even for the other musicians involved. And obviously, it's brilliant if you make a record or you play a gig and people connect to it, and that's part of the point of playing the music, is the connection with people that are going to listen to it. But I wouldn't necessarily. I don't think that in every context the idea of over-intellectualizing something is a bad thing. It's historically, culturally, contextually extremely loaded music. Bebop was created to a degree so that other people couldn't steal it, so I think there's a tradition of intellectualism in the music and complexity in the music, and specifically like black intellectualism in the music, that I don't think we should get away from. And I also don't think necessarily that playing free implies any less intellectualization. It's just a different form of intellectualization, I suppose, in terms of how you're thinking about it conceptually and how you're putting things together. So I definitely want to make music that I think is convincing and is compelling for people. But I guess, I don't know if this is a British phrase, but there's more than one way to skin a cat in that respect.
Right. Well, how do you answer? There's critics that talk about the younger musicians neglecting the tradition of the music. Perhaps the standards should be covered first or played first or that kind of thing. What are your views on that? Because I definitely hear, like I was referring to before, there are elements of bebop in here. You can hear some of that tradition in there. But what do you say to those that are talking about the younger musicians, that they're basically saying that, well, they've completely lost the connection to this historical Charlie Parker, this bebop kind of thing, and now everything is just them writing new complicated tunes, I guess.
I totally get that, and I feel like there's an infinite amount of answers to what is a really good and complicated question, but just to suggest a couple. I suppose I saw Theo Croker writing on his Instagram the other day about swing, and he was quite forthright about it, because I think people had said that his some of his more kind of music that has aspects of electronics and doesn't swing in the traditional ride cymbal Kenny Clark sense. People saying, but it doesn't swing, and I think he's absolutely right to say there's many different ways to hear swing, and that can mean many different things to different audiences in different musical contexts. So I think being informed by the tradition is, sometimes when people say things like that, it's because they don't hear it in the music, but others definitely could. And someone like Theo has kind of been to school on the road of other musicians, and he's building up his music that way. So I think, I heard Roscoe Mitchell and Tyshawn Sorey play in Philadelphia last week, and I didn't hear anyone playing a what might be traditionally perceived as a swing pattern on a ride cymbal during that, but I can totally hear that it's come out of a specific tradition. So I guess that's one thing, the way in which someone hears it. They might not be hearing the full picture necessarily. In terms of the tradition more generally, I kind of felt, as like a white Brit, I felt that I should, and I also wanted to spend quite a lot of time explicitly with the tradition, with Coleman Hawkins, with Coltrane, learning Sonny Rollins, learning Cannonball Adderley, learning Joe Henderson solos. I wanted to do that, and that was my choice. I wouldn't necessarily by default expect it from anybody else, but for me it felt important to engage in all that incredible music that's been made historically, and I feel glad that I've done that, and I feel that it benefits me that I've done that, I guess. But I guess you can only really ask people to do it if they want to do it.
Sure. Is that something that you would be interested in doing at some time in the future, of doing getting a group of musicians together and doing some of those standards, or an album of standards, Coleman Hawkins, some of those people that inspired you? Is that something you've considered, or are you just pretty much focusing on your own thing right now?
These are great questions. I wouldn't rule it out. I would do it if I felt that I had something to add. I don't think if I recorded a version of Body and Soul at the moment, I would necessarily add to what's been done historically, but one day I might.
So it's something that you're definitely not ruling out that would be a future project, which would definitely be. I think there aren't that many people doing that kind of thing, doing an album of standards. You still run across it. I mean, you get guys like Eric Alexander, and those guys will they'll cover some of those great classics. So yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things where your version's always going to be held up against those legends, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's my way of doing it, or whatever. So yeah,
absolutely. And again, more than one ways of doing it. Sorry to keep banging on about him, but this pianist Philip Golub, he's got a new duo album out with Leslie Mock, who is amongst other things a percussionist, and it's called Dream Brigade, and I think they play Darn That Dream, and I was listening to it and I wasn't looking at the track names while I was listening to it, and it took me a while to realise that's what it was. But that's them really taking that standard apart from the inside out, and I find that kind of thing really interesting. I also enjoy hearing people play standards straight down the line as well, and I enjoy doing that myself, but I guess I just wouldn't record it at this point. I would do it on a gig, which is interesting actually. I haven't really thought about why that is.
Yeah. Well, maybe future, you've got hopefully a lot of time to do a lot of cool projects. What are your views? Yeah. What are your views on the future of jazz? Or talk to us a little bit about what it is to actually be a jazz musician, making a living being a jazz musician, and the challenges and what you see in the future of jazz, because it's still, as far as record sales go, popularity of music, it's still 4% of record sales. But talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a tough question. I mean, I think it will always be popular, and there will always be an audience for it, and that's because of where it comes from and the history of it. And I feel that there is an obligation for people to keep making music that's informed by that tradition, and I think that they kind of inevitably will. So I kind of don't worry about it happening, I suppose. But I know that the ways in which it's made will continue to change. I think sometimes it varies country by country as well, like living in the US and also in the UK from both from a cost of living point of view, but from a funding point of view, and from a sort of precarity point of view of who's making it and who's not able to make the music because they're excluded financially or for a whole host of other reasons. I think they're pretty tough environments to be a jazz musician for a lot of people at the moment, whereas compared to in certain countries in Europe, there's a lot of funding. People are thinking a bit more proactively about including people that have historically not necessarily been included, or certainly not in the last 10 to 20 years. So I think it massively varies country by country, and obviously the music that is made will be affected by that in ways that it's very hard to predict. But in terms of, I guess it's a very simple thing to say, but every time you hear a sort of 17-year-old drummer or a 17-year-old sax player these days, like it's scary. So I don't think from a actually making the music point of view that it's in any danger whatsoever. I think it's more the infrastructure that goes around that music, and whether that's there and who gets to make it and who's supported to make it, not just people that have sort of independent access to money to support touring and recording and stuff like that.
So right now, touring, are you? I think I saw some upcoming things that are coming up in New York that you're playing, correct?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what you have going on coming up, both touring and as far as recordings go.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm in New York for the next month, and I'm playing with quite a wide variety of band leaders that I've met since I've been here for a year and a bit and really enjoy playing with. So the brilliant pianist called Dub and Ryu, there's a couple of great bass players called Dan Montgomery and Ben Young, and those are gigs around the city, and in the clubs that are kind of part of the lifeblood of the city, I guess. There's a newish club called Ornithology in Brooklyn. There's a musician run, I want to say owned, but I'm not 100% sure. But there's certainly a musician-run club in Manhattan called Close Up. Obviously, there's the sort of famous jazz gallery, which occupies a sort of position in the New York scene, a lot like the Vortex in London, which plays this really nurturing role in putting gigs on. So I'm playing in all of those places. I'm really lucky to do it, and lucky to get called by band leaders in a city where there's 7 million brilliant tenor sax players, and then after that I'm going back to Europe for a bit for some gigs in Spain and a few gigs in London. So that's kind of what's coming up over the next couple of months. And I guess just as a follow-on from that previous question, financially it can be tough. I think what's helpful is when some gigs cross-subsidise. So you might do a really well-paid gig in one place, which would then allow you to take a gig for much less money, but that you really wanted to do, or you really believed in the music. And I suppose that I'm really lucky to be able to do that, to kind of have enough work that I can make those decisions, that I can, practically speaking, take a gig where I'm not going to make that much and it can kind of be covered by another one. It's really difficult because not everybody has access to those well-paid gigs. It's not equitable in the way that those gigs are distributed. It's luck and chance, and how much spare time you have in your day to hustle gigs plays a big part in it. So it can be really tricky to be touring. It's the thing that I enjoy doing probably most. Certainly in my career, and one of the things that I enjoy doing most in my life is getting to play in different countries with different people for different people. So I'm really looking forward to it. And just finished some nice touring in March back in Europe as well. So it's I try and do it as much as I can, because I always find it super inspiring. I'm always writing and practicing as soon as I come back, practicing the things that I couldn't do on the tour.
And as far as what are your future recording projects coming up? You mentioned one that's going to be kind of the free jazz kind of. Is that just you and another person, or is that a band, or what is that?
There's a few actually. So I have a quintet recording that's coming out later this year, that I recorded last year. So I'd like to do another recording of that with the same band, and then I'm going to record with Eliana Fishbein, who I mentioned earlier, and that's just going to be duo, I think. And then I kind of have this idea. So, like I was saying, we did the first triple recording in the studio. We did the second one live, and I was thinking, where do you go from that? And I kind of had this idea where I'd like to do this sort of revolving recording where I would be there for the whole thing, but certainly not playing the whole time, for maybe about 5 or 6 hours, and you would have musicians rotating in and out at 15-20 minute intervals, maybe about between 15 and 20 musicians over a 5 to 6 hour period, and I'm not bothered about, we might hear the noises of them opening a door or swapping the bass or saying hello to each other as they come into the booth, but I think there's something in the continuousness of that really appeals to me, and I think there's also something in the stamina that will be required of me to play and be creative and sound okay for 5 or 6 hours that really appeals. And then I could imagine doing some quite involved post-production on that, depending on what gets played.
Wow, 5 or 6 hours, that's pretty that's pretty cool.
It's a funny one, because I would happily practice for 5 or 6 hours if I had the time and if you gave me the chance, so why not play for that length of time?
Interesting. What about any video projects, any DVDs, Blu-rays, live concert footage, things like that? Anything like that you're going to put together?
I don't have anything of that planned, but it's a really good idea. I guess in September we'll be launching the album that we recorded last year. We've got a launch gig in New York and a launch gig in London, and then maybe a couple of other places after that. And it would be really nice to have some sort of video documentation of that. But in terms of working with a videographer or a video artist for video's sake, no, but it's something that would be really great to do.
Awesome. Well, before we go, how do you? I know these are really creative projects you're putting together, which is really cool. How do you you come up with these ideas, and how do you view that as far as launching them as projects? In other words, how are they going to be received by the public, or are these all going to be? Are you going to keep these coming out on vinyl as well? Because that's people love the vinyl records.
Yes, if I can afford to, I'll keep them coming out on vinyl, I think. Although it would be nice to think about other formats as well. Obviously, CDs are super easy to tour with, and what I've noticed, especially playing in different European countries, is a Dutch audience, for example, bought all the vinyl that I had that night. An Italian audience wasn't interested in any vinyl and all bought CDs. So and I'm quite new to all of that because I've only just got vinyl to be selling. So that's quite a steep learning curve for me. So I might try a few different formats for different things. But in terms of putting things together, I read quite a lot. I read quite a bit of criticism of other music. Nate Chinan has a really good book called Playing Changes, I believe, and Phil Freeman of I think he does the Burning Ambulance podcast. He's got a really good book called Ugly Beauty, and just reading about how other artists have put their projects together and how they've worked tends to, I'm not necessarily trying to rip them off, but it tends to kind of catalyze other ideas that you might have. There's a good thing that Taishan Suri said, which is that he just tries to write music that he thinks is good and then tries to get it played and tries to get people to come to the concert. And I think that's quite, he's deliberately simplified that in terms of the stages that you have to go through, but I think that's quite a good thing to be working by. Write the thing, make the thing happen, try and get some people interested in it.
Yeah, it's nice that these record labels like Whirlwind and Cellar Music, you have a lot of these smaller independent record labels that are willing to step out and put a lot of this wonderful music that I would venture to say these larger record companies would never do, because that.
I think you would be correct there. Yeah,
and that's fantastic. So, all right, anything else you have for us before you go? I know you got other things to do, but I really appreciate you coming on.
I really appreciate your super thoughtful questions. Because they've been kind of comprehensive, I don't necessarily have anything to add, but it's been really nice. It's been really nice speaking.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we can have you back on when your new records come out, and when I get the Folk Devils record, I will definitely be doing a review of that. So stay tuned for that.
I look forward to it. I look forward to speaking again. Thank you so much.
And everybody, go out and get this, because this should be selling off the charts. 3 records with this is just a wonderful listening experience and fantastic music, wonderful playing, and what a cool package too. They did a really good job of putting this together.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Really appreciate it.
All right, Alex, take care.
You too.